Hi, my name is Luna, and I learned the hard way that sometimes the people who promise you the world will be the first to take it away. I grew up in a cozy craftsman-style house tucked into the quiet green suburbs of Portland, Oregon. To the outside world, we were your average American family. My dad, Daniel Caldwell. He was a financial planner who wore crisp button-downs and had a coffee mug that read, "Trust me, I'm good with numbers." My mom, Susan. He was an office manager at a local tax firm, Smartlyset. Warm, meticulous. We had dinner together every night at 6:30. No phones at the table. It was the kind of life that looked good on a Christmas card. From the time I was a little girl, my future was a family project. Stanford, my dad would say, ruffling my hair as I finished a 500-piece puzzle before kindergarten. That's where a brain like yours belongs. We've been saving since you were in pull-ups. My mom once whispered like it was a national secret. Your college fund is untouchable. That's your launch pad. Luna. I believed her. I believed all of it. And maybe that was my first mistake. While other kids were into Barbie or Minecraft, I was obsessed with how things worked. I'd pull apart old calculators, build solar circuits for science fair, and spend summers shadowing my cousin at the local hospital just to see what biomedicine looked like in real life. By the time I hit high school, my obsession had a name: enzyme biotechnology. Most kids didn't even know what that meant. I was already reading white papers on enzyme delivery systems and writing essays about solving acne on the molecular level. I was that girl, the one who color-coded her planner, laminated flashcards, and started test prep in sophomore year. Stanford wasn't just a dream, it was the destination. And my parents made it feel like they were building the road there with me. We had a folder in the family file cabinet, labeled Luna College Fund. I remember the first time Mom showed it to me 7 years old. Still in my elementary school uniform, we put money in every month, she said, smiling as she held up a printed saving statement like it was proof of love. This is your golden ticket. That folder was sacred. Proof that no matter how hard things got, no matter what life threw at us, there was a plan. That plan was me. And then there was Jake, my little brother, 3 years younger, wildly different. While I lived for structure, Jake thrived in chaos. He was charming, impulsive, and allergic to hard work. Failed his driver's test twice, tanked math all through middle school, and still managed to be the apple of everyone's eye. He's a builder. My mom said when he dropped out of a coding boot camp 6 weeks in, he just hasn't found his medium yet. Dad would laugh. Not everyone's wired for books. Jake's an innovator. He'll disrupt something. The word disrupt became their favorite way to defend his failures. Meanwhile, when I brought home an A- in AP Chem, Dad raised an eyebrow and asked, "What happened still?" I didn't resent Jake. Not really. I figured we just played different roles in the same story. I was the brain. He was the wild card. Families need both. Right, besides, when Stanford's acceptance email landed in my inbox on a rainy March afternoon, all that other noise faded into the background. I screamed so loud the neighbors thought someone had been murdered. I danced in the kitchen. Mom cried. Dad opened a bottle of sparkling cider. Jake gave me a high five and said, "Well, I guess I'll inherit the Civic." It was one of the happiest moments of my life. That night, over takeout Thai food and too much cheesecake. We sat around the kitchen table and talked logistics. Your fund's got about $145. Oh, zero in it, Dad said, scanning a spreadsheet on his laptop. It won't cover everything Stanford's north of 80 grand a year, but with scholarships, part-time work, and maybe a loan or two, we'll get you there. He was calm, confident, like a man who had checked every box and dotted every I. I felt like I was finally standing on the launch pad they'd promised me all along. The next few months were a whirlwind: housing applications, roommate meetups, campus maps, back-to-school shopping trips. Mom helped me pick out the perfect laptop. Dad researched noise-canceling headphones for library study sessions. Jake. He announced he was taking a gap year to work on a Web3 startup idea. No one blinked. Looking back now, I can see the signs. Mom started changing the subject when I brought up my dorm checklist. Dad had more late nights at the office than usual. Jake suddenly had a new phone, new clothes, and spent hours on Zoom calls with investors. But I was too busy imagining my new life at Stanford to see the cracks in the foundation. Sometimes, when you're so focused on the future, you don't notice the floor beneath you is slowly disappearing. 2 weeks before move-in day, everything changed. Dad called a family meeting in the living room. Jake barely looked up from his phone. Mom sat rigid on the couch, twisting a paper napkin in her hands. And then came the words I'll never forget. "Luna, there's been a situation with your college fund." Silence fell over the room like fog. I looked from my dad to my mom, waiting for one of them to explain what he meant by a situation with your college fund. Mr. Mac sank. But I was still holding on to hope. Maybe it was just a delay. Maybe a clerical error at the bank. Maybe a misplaced transfer that could be corrected. "We lost it," Mom whispered. Her voice cracked like ice under pressure. "We lost the fund." "Luna." "Lost. Like a pair of keys, like an umbrella on a train. What do you mean lost?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "How do you lose $145,000? Dad exhaled sharply, like he'd been rehearsing this confession for days. 8 months ago, I was approached about a private investment, a startup opportunity. It was a chance to grow the fund double, maybe even triple the amount before you started Stanford. I blinked. "You invested my college fund. It seemed like a sure thing." He said, "An emerging tech platform. Early investor access. It was vetted. There were other people involved, people I trust." My throat went dry. "And what happened?" His voice turned flat. "The startup collapsed. The founders disappeared. The SEC is investigating." I felt like someone had just pulled the floor out from under me. I clutched the armrest of the couch, trying to stay upright. "You never asked me," I said slowly. "You never even told me." Mom looked like she wanted to cry, but the tears felt more like guilt than grief. "We wanted to surprise you. We thought we were making it better for you." I turned to Jake, who was still slouched in his chair like he'd been forced to watch a boring documentary. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even curious. That's when I knew. "You knew?" I asked him, barely above a whisper. "Jake? You knew they lost my fund?" He finally looked at me. "I found out like 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks, my voice rose. "And you didn't think to say anything. What was I supposed to do?" he muttered. "It's not like I was the one who made the decision." Dad stepped in. "We've been trying to figure out a solution. Talking to the bank. Reaching out to Stanford. Exploring other aid options." "So, what now?" I asked. "I have 2 weeks before I'm supposed to move into my dorm." "What do I do, Dad?" Hesitated. "We think it might be smarter to consider alternatives, like University of Oregon. You could live at home, cut down expenses, maybe transfer to Stanford later." "No," I said firmly, almost without thinking. I've worked for this my entire life. I'm going to Stanford. Luna. Mom said gently. We're just trying to be realistic. No. You're trying to clean up your mistake by asking me to lower my expectations. Jake rolled his eyes. It's just a school. Luna, you act like it's life or death. I looked at him. Stunned. Easy for you to say. You've never had a plan. Okay. That's enough. Dad snapped. We're all upset. But this isn't helping. I stood up. Heart pounding. I need time. I'll figure something out. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake in my room, the same room I'd grown up in, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. They hadn't just made a mistake. They'd gambled with my future. Without asking. Without warning. And worse, they had lied about it. At dawn, I got up, brewed a pot of coffee, and opened my laptop. I emailed Stanford's financial aid office explaining the situation. I researched emergency grants, private scholarships, personal loan options, even GoFundMe campaigns. I created an Excel sheet of potential funding sources and started making calls. By the next day, I had a working plan. It wasn't pretty. It meant taking on $70,000 in student loans, working 20 hours a week in addition to my coursework, and living on the bare minimum. No spring breaks, no luxuries, no breathing room. But it would get me there. I presented the plan to my parents at dinner that night. Dad scanned the sheet, frowning. This is reckless. You lost the money. I said quietly. I'm just trying to salvage my dream. You're being emotional. He replied. You're setting yourself up for decades of debt. You mean like the debt I didn't ask for, I said. My voice calm but cold. He didn't respond. 2 weeks later, they drove me to Stanford, but the excitement was gone. No balloons. No happy tears. They helped me carry 2 boxes into a cramped dorm room with no air conditioning. They didn't linger. No photos. No hugs. Just awkward silence and a quick goodbye. I sat on the bare mattress for a long time after they left, unsure of what hurt more, the betrayal or the indifference. My first semester was brutal. I worked 3 campus jobs tutoring, shelving books in the library, and wiping down tables at the student dining hall. I skipped meals. I used my phone flashlight to study in hallways after lights out. While my classmates attended mixers and joined clubs, I was calculating which week I could afford to do laundry. One night, while I was editing a lab report during a 1A flast, library shift, my roommate Kelsey looked over and said, You know, my dad's a VC. He always says, you can't hustle your way out of a financial hole with minimum wage. You have to build something bigger. I didn't know it at the time, but that sentence would change my life. Winter break arrived sooner than I expected. I should have been excited to go home, catch up on sleep, and escape the grind. But instead, I felt dread crawling under my skin. I hadn't fully processed what my parents had done, hadn't had the emotional space to, but now I'd be stuck under the same roof as them for 3 weeks. And something told me the story wasn't over. Dad picked me up from the Portland train station in the same silver SUV they had last summer, except it wasn't the same. The license plate was different. The rims were different. I knew that car. This one was newer. Nice upgrade. I commented casually as I slid into the passenger seat. He hesitated. Just a small trade-in? The old one had a few issues. Interesting. This from the man who said we couldn't afford Stanford because of a lost investment. Back at the house, Nothing looked like a family in financial distress. New living room furniture. A bigger flat-screen television. Fresh landscaping in the yard. Mom had her hair cut and highlighted in a way I'd only seen on Pinterest boards for expensive salons. I walked through the hallway like a detective at a crime scene, taking in the little details and piecing together a puzzle I hadn't yet finished. Then I stepped into Jake's room. Once a cluttered teenage cave of Xbox controllers and pizza boxes, it now looked like a startup command center. Dual monitors. Ergonomic chair. Whiteboard filled with diagrams and words like scalability and user growth. A brand new MacBook sat glowing on his desk. His bed was unmade, but the tech setup was spotless. "What's all this?" I asked Mom later that night. She smiled proudly. "Jake's been working on something really exciting, a tech startup. It's called Nexora. It's a networking platform for young entrepreneurs and investors." I raised an eyebrow. Didn't he just drop out of that online coding program like 4 months ago? Well, she shrugged. He's learning by doing. Some people just don't thrive in a classroom setting. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because now I knew exactly where my college fund had gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling I used to tape glow-in-the-dark stars to. My head buzzed with thoughts. I needed proof. Evidence. Not just suspicion. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went. Around midnight, I crept out of bed and down the hall. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional clink of ice in a glass. I paused at the top of the stairs. Voices drifted up from the living room. "She looks tired," Dad said, his tone low. "Probably from working all those jobs." "She seems okay," Mom replied. "A little thinner." "Maybe. But she's tough." "Do you think she suspects anything?" Dad asked. There was a pause. "No," Mom said. "Why would she? As far as she knows, we're victims too. She's too busy trying to survive Stanford to notice what's happening here." Then Jake's voice cut in. "When are we going to tell her about Nexora? She's going to find out eventually." "Das I had. We'll tell her when we have something to show. Once we're profitable, she'll understand. She's smart enough to get it. She'll thank us," Mom added. Eventually, this was the smarter play. She gets her degree. Jake builds something real. Besides, Dad said flatly, education's overrated now. All the billionaires dropped out of college. Jake's our Zuckerberg. Something in me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp or storm downstairs. I just turned around, walked silently back to my room, and started planning. The next day, I played it cool. Jake and I ended up alone in the kitchen one morning. I casually leaned against the counter and gestured toward his setup. "So, what exactly are you building in there? Looks pretty legit." His eyes lit up, just like I'd expected. "It's called Nexora," he said. "Think of it like a cross between LinkedIn and Shark Tank. People pitch their ideas to investors through video, and the algorithm matches them by category and risk level. I'm working with a dev team in Texas and a guy I met on Reddit who's into blockchain architecture." "Wow," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "And you're funding this how?" He paused. "Dad helped. He believes in it." "I'm sure he does." Over the next few days, I conducted my own quiet investigation. When my parents went out, I slipped into Dad's home office. There, buried between tax forms and mutual fund statements, I found a file labeled Nexora Holdings LLC. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers. One in particular stood out, a $90 help and entered splater. Oh, Zero transfer from the Caldwell education. Trust my college fund straight into an Exora business account. I took photos of everything. Then I searched the shared family desktop. I found emails Dad discussing the reallocation of funds. Mom responding with, "Let's hope Luna doesn't find out." I even found a pitch deck Jake had made, boasting initial funding secured from private family capital. Private family capital. That was me. I saved every document, every screenshot, every email. I created a hidden folder in my personal drive labeled "For Justice." Back at Stanford, I met with a legal advisor through the university. She reviewed everything. Morally, this is egregious. She said, legally, trickier. If the account was in your parents' name, and there was no written restriction on its use, it'll be hard to claim misappropriation. So they can just get away with it. She looked at me. Not necessarily. You may not have legal leverage right now, but you have power. Real power. Don't underestimate that. I left the meeting feeling two things I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity and fire. They had stolen my future to fund a fantasy. Now it was my turn. Not for revenge. Not to destroy them, but to build something so real, so valuable, so undeniable, that they'd never again be able to dismiss what I was capable of. They bet on the wrong kid. And I was going to show them exactly what that meant. I returned to Stanford in January with a renewed sense of purpose, but not the kind you'd expect. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. Not my professors. Not my classmates. And definitely not my family. My goal had narrowed into something razor-sharp and personal. I was going to build something they couldn't take from me. Something that didn't rely on trust or promises, only skill, effort, and truth. While most students were easing into spring semester with fresh notebooks and leftover holiday joy, I was back on the grind. Harder than before. 5 hours of sleep on a good night. Meals that consisted of peanut butter sandwiches eaten between classes. 3 jobs: library assistant, loptik, and part-time tutor. It wasn't sustainable. And I knew it. But I needed the noise, the momentum, the exhaustion. Because when I slowed down, the betrayal crept in again. One day, after a long afternoon in the biolab, Professor Eliza Monroe, my advanced molecular biology instructor, asked to speak with me after class. "You look like you've been run through a centrifuge," she said, folding her arms. "I'm fine." I lied, adjusting my backpack. "No, you're not," she said bluntly. "You've turned in every assignment, crushed every quiz. And you're obviously brilliant, but brilliance doesn't last long when you're burning at both ends." I didn't reply. She tilted her head. "I've seen students like you before. You're not just working hard, you're trying to outrun something." I swallowed. And then, before I could stop myself, it all spilled out. The missing college fund. The lies. The startup they funded with my future. The jobs. The hunger. The nights I cried in my dorm shower so no one would hear. To my surprise, Professor Monroe didn't look horrified or even pitying. She looked impressed. "That's a terrible betrayal," she said softly. "But now I have to ask you something more important. What are you going to do with it?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "You've got rage, talent, and discipline. That's a potent combination if you direct it towards something that builds rather than breaks." "I blinkte her." "You want me to just move on?" "No," she said. "I want you to move forward." She paused, then walked over to her desk and pulled out a folder. "I'm leading a research group focused on enzyme-targeted delivery systems," she said. "It's complex, demanding, And we could use someone with your kind of mind. There's a small stipend involved. Not much. But better than what the dining hall pays. Interested, I stared at her. My chest tightened not because I was nervous, but because for the first time in months, someone saw value in me that had nothing to do with money. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. I'm in. Working in Professor Monroe's lab was like breathing oxygen after months underwater. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me who I was, someone who could create, not just survive. The work was exhilarating microscopic adjustments, targeted enzyme channels, tracking compounds as they danced their way through simulated tissue. It was magic, and math and art all rolled into one. And somewhere in that whirlwind of data and discovery, a new idea began to form. It started small, a single question. Sparked by something Monroe had mentioned offhand about bio-targeting applications. Could we adapt this for use in skincare delivery systems? She blinked. You mean cosmetic applications? I nodded. Most active ingredients in serums never penetrate deep enough to do anything. If we could re-engineer enzyme channels to deliver molecules precisely to the dermal layer, she leaned back in her chair. That's actually not crazy. We started testing the theory in parallel with our main project. Nights and weekends became sacred time, just me. A whiteboard full of crazy formulas. And a notebook rapidly filling with sketches and calculations. I wasn't chasing a grade anymore. I was chasing freedom. Freedom from debt. Freedom from dependence. Freedom from the people who had once called themselves my biggest supporters and then proved otherwise. By late March, I had a working model. Primitive, but promising. The idea was simple, a precision enzyme delivery system that could transform the skincare industry. Targeted penetration. Zero waste. Real molecular change, not just surface-level fluff. I brought it to Professor Monroe, half expecting her to laugh. Instead, she said, "You need to protect this." She connected me with the university's Office of Technology Licensing. They loved the innovation and fast-tracked my patent application with Stanford's support. Because I had developed the concept while under Monroe's supervision, Stanford retained a portion of ownership, but the majority belonged to me. And just like that, an idea born from betrayal had become intellectual property. Still, I needed more than a patent. I needed a team. That's when I met Trey Adams, an MBA student with a background in biopharma who was giving a guest lecture in one of Monroe's seminars. We spoke afterward. And within minutes, he was hooked. "You have a disruptive product in a trillion-dollar industry," he said. Eyes lit up. "All you need now is a business plan and a name." We started meeting weekly at a student cafe with wobbly tables and terrible coffee. Soon after, we added Leah Brooks to the mix, a grad student in organic chemistry who had interned at L'Oréal and knew the cosmetic market inside out. Together, we became Lunava Labs, named partly after me, but also a nod to what it meant rebuilding from the dark side of the moon. We applied for Stanford's internal startup accelerator and were accepted. We worked out of a dusty shared workspace with barely functioning AC, surviving on granola bars and grant money. But we had momentum. We had science. We had a vision. And we had something my family never thought I'd find without them. Power. Not the kind you inherit. The kind you earn. Spring at Stanford brought wildflowers and sunlight, but for me, it brought something else entirely possibility. By April, Lunava Labs was no longer just a side project. It was real. Tangible. We had a working prototype. A provisional patent. And thanks to Trey's business savvy, a sleek pitch deck that didn't just look like a startup, it sounded like one too. We called it Deep Cell, the world's first enzyme-powered skincare delivery system designed to target beneath the skin's surface and actually work. At the time, I didn't realize how rare it was to have both science and a story. But we had both. And more importantly, we had something the market didn't even know it was desperate for. You don't need another luxury serum. Trey would say during our practice pitches, you need results. Luna created a technology that doesn't just sit on your skin, it speaks to it. The accelerator demo day was scheduled for late May, and we had 2 months to make a mark. We pitched to anyone who would listen: investors, professors, student groups, skincare forums, even late-night Reddit AMAs. Each time, our story grew stronger, more refined. But what no one could replicate was the why behind it. I remember standing in front of a panel of venture capitalists, my palms sweaty, heart racing. As I said, I didn't create this out of privilege. I created this out of necessity. After losing my college fund to a lie, I had 2 choices: crumble or create. And I chose to create. Silence. Then, a slow, growing applause. They weren't just investing in science, they were investing in survival, in strength, in a girl who refused to be defined by what was taken from her. And soon, they did invest. We secured our first angel check 2 weeks before demo day. A woman named Dana Carlton, founder of a female-led VC firm in San Francisco, heard our story and didn't blink. You're not just building skincare, she said. You're building a legacy. With her backing, the rest followed. At demo day, we walked into the packed auditorium with a fire in our bones. The lights were blinding, but I felt no fear, only purpose. Trey opened the pitch. Leah walked through the data. And I told the story. Not just the science, not just the product, but the journey, the betrayal, the hunger. The moment I realized that I didn't need saving, I just needed a chance. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone stood, then another. Applause echoed like a wave. By the end of the week, we had 3 term sheets. Luna Labs raised Outsmarted. $2 million in pre-seed funding. I stood in the courtyard outside the auditorium, staring up at the California sky. Tears welling in my eyes, not from pride, but from something deeper, something older. I wasn't just building a future. I was reclaiming the past. That summer, we moved into a co-working space in Palo Alto. It wasn't glamorous. Our first office had a leaky ceiling and shared bathrooms, but it was ours. Our lab equipment was secondhand. Our chairs wobbled. But we were building. Day by day, orders started coming in through a basic Shopify site we'd thrown together overnight. Then came press coverage. First, small beauty blogs, then tech newsletters. Then, out of nowhere, Wired magazine requested an interview. The piece went viral. The Stanford student who turned betrayal into biotech gold. Suddenly, we weren't just a startup. We were a story. I got DMs from girls across the country, college students, high schoolers, even young professionals, saying, "You're the reason I didn't give up." That was the first time I understood the full weight of what I was carrying. It wasn't just about science anymore. It was about hope. But with success came visibility. And with visibility came my family. It started with a text from Jake. Jake, hey. Saw the Wired article. Pretty cool stuff. Want to catch up? I didn't respond. Then came the email from my dad, subject, proud of you. Body saw the company. Incredible work. Luna. We should talk soon. Let's reconnect. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even revenge. It was peace. Because for the first time, I realized I didn't need anything from them anymore. Not money. Not praise. Not closure. They had bet on the wrong dream. And I had become something they never expected. Free. That fall, Lunava launched our first full product line. It sold out in 3 days. We partnered with a women-led lab in Colorado to scale production ethically. No exploitative sourcing. No gimmicks. Just clean, science-backed skincare that actually worked. We didn't need celebrity endorsements. Our users became our voice. And me, I stayed in the lab. I stayed in the story. I kept showing up, not for revenge, not for approval, but because I believed in what we were building. Some nights, I'd look at the deep cell prototype on my desk and whisper, they tried to take everything, and I turned it into something. Success doesn't silence the past, it amplifies it. By the start of my senior year, Lunava Labs had doubled in size. We had a small but mighty team of chemists, marketers, and engineers. Our product line was expanding, and we were negotiating our first major retail partnership. I was still a full-time student taking finals in the morning and managing investor calls at night. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But something inside me was starting to crack. It began quietly. A familiar phone number showed up on my screen during a pitch meeting. Dad. I let it ring. Then came an email from Mom. The subject line simply read, "Please read." I stared at it for days before opening it. Luna. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and maybe I deserve that. But your father isn't well. He had a mild heart attack last month. He's recovering. But it scared him. It scared all of us. He keeps saying your name in his sleep. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a visit. Just one conversation. Mom. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't type, couldn't breathe. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend they no longer existed. But another part, the part that still carried the wound they left behind, ached for something. Not reconciliation. Just clarity. I didn't tell anyone. Not my co-founders. Not my roommate. I booked a one-way ticket home under the radar. The moment I stepped off the plane in Portland, the air hit me like memory. Damp. Pine-scented. Heavy with familiarity. I hadn't been home in over 2 years. Not since the night everything unraveled. My mom met me at arrivals. Her hair had more gray than I remembered. Her hug was stiff at first. Then trembling. I wasn't sure you'd come, she whispered. I wasn't sure either, I replied. She drove in silence most of the way. The house looked almost exactly the same, except smaller. And colder. Dad was on the couch, pale and thinner than I'd ever seen him. When he saw me, his eyes filled with something between shame and longing. Hi, kid, he said softly. Hi. He tried to stand, but I held up my hand. Don't. We sat in silence for a while. I've watched every interview, he said. Read every article. I even ordered the serum. I almost laughed. You didn't think to mention that in your apology email, he winced. I didn't think I deserved to write one. Silence again. Then finally he broke. I was wrong. Luna. About everything. I thought I could make things better. Smarter. I thought if the investment worked out, I'd be the hero. The one who gave his daughter more than she ever imagined. But when it fell apart, I didn't know how to face you. So I ran. I hid behind pride. I stared at him. You didn't just lose money. You broke trust. I know. he whispered. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see it now. The air between us held years of weight. I used to dream about this moment. I admitted. You apologizing. Me saying all the things I never had the chance to scream. But now that I'm here, I don't feel rage. I just feel tired. He nodded slowly. Me too. We sat there for a long time, watching the evening light creep through the blinds. Finally, he said, "You're everything I hoped you'd be. And more. Not in spite of us, but because of what you overcame. I see that now." That hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, all I had ever wanted wasn't revenge, it was recognition. Later that night, I sat in my childhood bedroom. My Stanford acceptance letter still hung on the wall, yellowed by time. Next to it was a photo of me at 17, bright-eyed, full of dreams. That girl had no idea the storm coming for her. But she survived it. She didn't just survive, she built from it. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed the deepest betrayal, the brightest fire, a letter to the girl who almost gave up, and I began to write, not for press, not for fundraising, not for branding, just for me, just to remember. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like sitting across from the people who hurt you and realizing they no longer hold the pen to your story. The next morning, I said goodbye. I don't know what happens next. I told my dad. But I do know I'm not stuck in the past anymore. Tears welled in his eyes. That's more than I deserve. Thank you for coming. I hugged my mom at the door. And then I left. Not with closure. Not with everything fixed, but with a heart that was no longer carrying the weight of silence. Back at Stanford, the team greeted me with hugs and coffee and a whiteboard covered in plans for our next product line. "You good, Trey?" asked. I smiled. I'm better than I've ever been. Because now, I wasn't running from anything. I was running towards something. And that changes everything. When I stepped back into our office in Palo Alto after that trip home, something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically. Not like a movie climax. But quietly, like a bone finally clicking back into place. I was no longer trying to prove anything. Not to my parents. Not to the world. Not even to myself. Now, I was simply building. And that made me dangerous in the best way. By winter, Lunava Labs had outgrown our co-working space. We moved into a new office near the edge of Stanford's campus, a former design studio with exposed beams and skylights that spilled sunshine across our lab tables. There were days when I'd walk in early, before anyone else, and just stand there. No music. No coffee. Just me and the silence of something we'd built from nothing. We were no longer a scrappy student startup. We were a brand, a voice, a movement. Our Deep Cell line had exploded on social media. Influencers praised it. Dermatologists backed it. And most importantly, our customers kept coming back. Not because of hype, but because it worked. Emails poured in every week. Women saying it healed their adult acne. Men saying it helped their confidence return. Teenagers saying it made them feel seen. One message stood out. A girl named Brooke. 19. From Ohio. Hi, Luna. I know you'll probably never see this. But I had to write anyway. I used to hate my skin and honestly, myself. Your serum changed my face. Yeah. But your story, that changed my heart. Because you made me believe I could build something beautiful from my pain too. Thank you. Brooke, I sat there crying in the middle of our office kitchen, holding my phone like it was made of gold. Because it hit me, this was no longer about skin. It was about worth. About telling people, you are not broken. You are becoming. In March, we hit a major milestone, our first nationwide partnership. Nordstrom, they wanted to carry Lunava in select locations, starting with San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. A test run. They called it. I remember our first strategy meeting like it was yesterday. I was pacing in front of a whiteboard. Trey was scribbling margins. Leah was firing off timelines. Do we have the capacity to scale? Trey asked. Barely. Leah muttered. Then we find a way. I said, that became our motto for the next 3 months. Find. Embered a way. We worked around the clock, onboarding a second manufacturer, upgrading fulfillment, redesigning our packaging with compostable materials. There were moments I didn't sleep, days I forgot to eat, but never once did I lose sight of why we started. And on the day Nordstrom went live, we sold out in under 6 hours. CNN called, then Forbes, then The Today Show. One producer asked me, how does it feel to go from almost dropping out to running one of the fastest-growing skincare brands in the country? I looked into the camera and smiled. It feels like I'm exactly where I was meant to be. I said, but also it feels like I'm just getting started. But success is never a straight line. And growth has its price. Our team doubled, then tripled. I found myself in more boardrooms than labs. Investor relations, legal calls, HR protocols, exit strategy planning. There were mornings I woke up and barely recognized my own life. Was this the dream? Was this what I had fought for, or had I lost something along the way? One night, around 2 a.m., I wandered into our office lab. The lights were dim. A single test tube rack sat under a glowing microscope. Forgotten after a late test, I stood there for a long time, remembering the beginning. The betrayal, the rage, the hunger, but also remembering the girl who stayed up all night sketching enzymes on the back of coffee receipts, the one who didn't care about press or profit, just possibility. I whispered into the dark, are you still in here? And somewhere in the silence, I heard it. Yes. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let growth hollow us out. I wasn't going to become another brand that forgot its soul. So we launched Project Mirror, an initiative to give back 10% of our profits to underrepresented young founders in STEM. We set up a mentorship program, hosted free workshops for high school girls, donated product to shelters and halfway homes. And we made it company culture, not just PR. Because I learned something. Nobody teaches you in business school. Success means nothing if you don't pull others up with you. That summer, I was invited to give the keynote address at Stanford's commencement. I almost said no. But something told me this wasn't about me. It was about the girl in the 10th row who might be carrying a silent weight. So I stood on that stage, looking out over thousands of faces. And I told them the truth. Not the polished version. The real one. I told them how I lost everything. How I almost gave up. How I built something from rock bottom. Not because I had a plan, but because I refused to stay broken. And I ended with this. If you ever find yourself standing in the ashes of a life you didn't choose, I want you to remember one thing. Ash is fertile ground. And what you plant there might just change the world. They stood, they clapped, they cried. And as I walked off stage, I didn't feel proud. I felt home. A few months after the Stanford keynote, I was back in Palo Alto, sitting alone on the rooftop of our office building, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped below the California hills. The world had gone quiet for a moment. Our numbers were good. Our people were thriving. The press buzz had settled into something steadier, something more real. But beneath all the momentum, I felt it again, that tugging sensation in my chest. A whisper that asked, what now? I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. But I was searching. Not for success. Not for more. But for meaning. And then, just like it always does when we least expect it, life sent an answer. It came in the form of a letter. A physical one. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it slowly. Curious. It was a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice. The handwriting was neat, a little shaky. Maybe older? It read, Dear Luna, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I hope it does. My name is Evelyn. I'm 78 years old. I live in a small town in Arkansas you've probably never heard of. I don't use Instagram. I don't know what a startup really is. But my granddaughter, Lily, does. She's 17. She's struggled with her skin for years. Bullied. Withdrawn. Quiet. Last year, she found your product online. It helped her skin. Yes, but what really changed her was your story. One night, I found her reading an article about you. She was crying. She said, Grandma. She made it out. She made something out of the pain. Maybe I can too. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing is bigger than products, bigger than skincare. You gave my granddaughter hope. And that, well, that matters. Thank you. Evelyn Myers. I sat there on the rooftop for a long time, the letter shaking in my hands. It was as if the universe had reached down, touched my shoulder, and said, Yes. Keep going. That night, I gathered our team. Not for a metrics meeting, not for a product roadmap, but for a story circle. I stood in front of them, holding Evelyn's letter. We're not a skincare company. I said, We're a lighthouse. They stared at me, a little confused. You know what lighthouses do, right? I smiled. They don't chase ships. They don't scream. They just shine. Quietly. Consistently. So, the lost can find their way home. Trey leaned forward. So what are you saying? I'm saying we go bigger. Not in Zeiss. In Seoul. That was the night we birthed Lunava Stories, a digital journal built into our website and app. A space where anyone, customers, teens, elders, strangers could submit their stories of healing, identity, struggle, transformation. No ads, no algorithms, just truth. Within weeks, we had hundreds of submissions. People wrote about addiction, about heartbreak, about resilience after cancer, and how caring for their skin became a doorway to reclaiming their bodies, their self-worth. It became our most visited page. Because, in a world addicted to filters, we had offered something raw. Around that same time, we launched Lunava Light, our nonprofit arm. Its mission was simple: provide dermatological care and mental health resources to underserved youth, especially those dealing with visible skin conditions and self-esteem trauma. We partnered with clinics in low-income areas, built curriculum, hired social workers, and we never used it for PR. Because real light doesn't need a spotlight. One afternoon, we got a call from the Ellen DeGeneres show. They wanted to feature us in a surprise segment. Apparently, someone had submitted Evelyn's letter. I declined. Politely. Not because I didn't appreciate the platform, but because I knew not every sacred thing should be turned into content. Instead, I booked a flight to Arkansas. I didn't tell the press. I didn't even tell my team. I just showed up at a little white house with pink shutters. Knocked on the door. And waited. Evelyn answered. She looked exactly like I imagined, small. Kind eyes. Hands like history? When I introduced myself. She gasped. Luna, she whispered. Yes. Ma'am? She hugged me like I was family. Inside. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes filled with tears. I can't believe you're real, she said. I sat with them for hours. We talked about fear, about womanhood, about survival. I gave Lily a full year's supply of product. Some books that changed my life. And a promise. If you ever build something, I told her, I'll be your first investor. On the plane home, I looked out over the clouds and smiled. Because that's when it hit me, we don't rise to escape the world. We rise so we can reach back for others. Lunava Labs had started as a reaction to betrayal. But now, it was an offering. To every girl who was ever overlooked, to every boy who was told he wasn't enough, to every soul still sitting in the dark, wondering if anyone will ever see them. Yes, we see you. And this is just the beginning. There's something strange about returning to the place that broke you when you come back, not as a victim, but as someone who found a way to rise. It was early fall when I got the invitation, a small business and entrepreneurship forum at Eastbrook High School. My old stomping grounds in Oregon, the same school where I used to sketch enzyme sequences in the margins of my notebooks and avoid eye contact in the hallways. The principal had changed. The gym had a new coat of paint, but the air still smelled like teenage dreams raw. Insecure. Reaching. Would you consider coming back to speak? The email read. Your story has made waves here. You're one of us. And we're proud. I stared at the message for a long time. Eastbrook was where my family had first started unraveling, where I first felt invisible, where I first learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you don't. But it was also where I discovered science, where I met Miss Hartwell, the chemistry teacher who once let me stay after class just to talk about molecules because she sensed I didn't want to go home. So I said yes. I flew into Portland under a gray sky, the kind that always hung low in the fall. The town hadn't changed much. Same coffee shop, same hardware store, same Go Falcons banner across the school fence. But I had changed. I walked into that auditorium wearing a navy blazer, a simple white tee, and sneakers. Not flashy, not polished, just me. The lights dimmed, the chatter softened, and I stepped onto the stage. Hi, I said into the mic, smiling. My name is Luna. I used to sit where you are. A few kids straightened in their seats. I scanned the crowd, dozens of faces. Some curious, some bored, a few with guarded eyes. I knew those eyes. I'd been those eyes. I wasn't popular. I continued. Didn't make varsity anything. Got left off a lot of party invites. But I loved biology. And I believed deep down that there had to be more out there than what I could see from these hallways. I told them about the betrayal, about losing everything, about crying in the dark, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. Then I told them about rebuilding. From the basement, from borrowed books, from molecules and moonlight and sheer grit. I told them about Lunava Labs, about Evelyn and Lily, about how every no had eventually turned into a yes because I kept going. And then I asked, what if the very thing that broke you was the beginning of your brilliance? What if you're not behind, not forgotten? What if you're right on time? The room was silent. Not bored, silent. Breath held silent. Because the truth, when it's spoken gently and without shame, has a way of reaching even the most armored hearts. After the talk, a line of students formed. Some asked about product development, others about college. One girl, maybe 15, said, "You made me feel like I'm allowed to want more." I hugged her tight. Then, just as I was packing up, I saw them, my parents, standing near the back of the auditorium. It had been nearly 2 years since we'd spoken. Since that phone call when I demanded they repay what was stolen, they had. Eventually, but the damage went deeper than money. We hadn't mended, just posed. My father looked older. My mother was holding a folded piece of paper. I walked over slowly. "Hi," I said. My mom smiled cautiously. "Hi, Luna." My dad cleared his throat. "We saw the article in the Oregonian about your foundation. I didn't know you'd be here." I said softly, "We weren't sure we should come." My mom admitted, "But we wanted to hear you speak and to say something." She handed me the folded paper. I opened it. It was a check, made out to the Lunava Light Foundation. eBay. Ling. I blinked. "What is this?" "It's from the investment Nathan made." My dad said, "The one we took your tuition for." It finally paid out. Big. And we realized this money should have always been yours. I stared at the check. Not because of the number, but because it was the first time they had acknowledged the truth out loud and with action. My mom touched my arm. "We're proud of you. Even if we didn't show it the right way, you did what we couldn't." I felt tears rise, but I held them, because this wasn't a moment for breaking. It was a moment for choosing. And I chose grace. "Thank you," I whispered. "I mean that." They asked if I wanted to grab lunch. Just the 3 of us. I said yes. Not because everything was healed, but because healing has to start somewhere. Later that night, I stood by the Eastbrook River, watching the sun dip behind the pine trees. I thought of everything that had led me here, every betrayal, every sleepless night, every risk. And I thought of a younger me, hiding under her covers, wondering if she'd ever feel safe in her own life. I whispered to her in my mind, "You made it, kid." And then, almost laughing to myself, I added, "But this isn't the end." Because I knew now the journey doesn't stop when you succeed. It only deepens. Because once you've climbed out of your own darkness, your job is to light the path for others. To be continued. I used to think success was a finish line, something you crossed, arms raised in victory, applause ringing in your ears. But the truth is, real success is quiet. It's not in the headlines. It's not in the pitch decks or photo ops. It's in the lives we touch when no one is watching. 2 years after that visit to Eastbrook, Lunava Labs was acquired by a global wellness company in a deal that left many jaws on the floor. $38 million. People expected me to celebrate in Miami or Paris. Maybe buy a yacht or move into a Beverly Hills mansion. Instead, I took the first flight to Montana. No cameras. No entourage. Just me. A backpack. And a journal. I rented a cabin near Flathead Lake, where the sky feels like it could swallow you whole, and the stars seem to whisper ancient secrets. I spent a month there thinking, grieving, dreaming. Because endings, even beautiful ones, come with grief too. You say goodbye to the version of yourself who fought so hard, who never stopped, who kept showing up when no one clapped. And in her place, a quieter self emerges. One who knows her worth doesn't live in the spotlight, but in her stillness. During those days in Montana, I began writing, not emails, not strategies, but pages filled with memories, pain, healing, and truth. The working title Built from Ashes, because that's what I was. Not a phoenix rising in glory, but a girl who had to burn everything she thought she knew, only to discover her soul beneath the rubble. I wrote about betrayal. Yes, but I also wrote about wonder. I wrote about the nights I worked under a flickering bulb, about the first time someone said thank you because of something I built, about Lily, about Evelyn, about my team, about my parents, about me. I didn't write to teach. I wrote to tell the truth. And sometimes, the truth is all we have to give. 6 months later, Built from Ashes was published. Quietly, independently. I didn't expect much, but it took off like wildfire. Not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. Within weeks, I was receiving letters from all over the country. Young women, single dads, high school teachers, veterans, people who had fallen down hard and were learning how to rise again. One letter said, "You made me believe that being broken wasn't the end, that it was just the beginning of becoming something whole." Another wrote, "Thank you for giving a name to the ache I've carried, and thank you for showing me how to live beyond it." I cried. A lot. Because that's when I knew I hadn't just built a business. I'd built a legacy. Today, I no longer run a startup. Instead, I run a space called the Ember Collective. It's a storytelling hub, a mentorship incubator, a foundation, and a sanctuary all rolled into one. We don't just talk about success. We talk about the in-between. The nights no one sees, the heartbreaks behind every headline, the soft courage it takes to begin again. We host retreats in Keyat forests, support young founders from marginalized backgrounds, fund mental health initiatives in under-resourced schools. And every year, we award the Evelyn Myers Grant to one young woman pursuing a dream everyone else told her was impossible. Lily was the first recipient. She now runs her own creative agency in Seattle, specializing in inclusive branding for health and wellness companies. Sometimes, when I feel tired or unsure, I think of her, and I remember this is why we keep going. Not for applause, but for the light we leave behind. So now, when people ask, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned?" I smile. Because I've learned many. I've learned that pain is a seed, that forgiveness is freedom, that boundaries are an act of love, that silence can speak louder than success. But perhaps most of all, I've learned this: you don't have to be whole to begin. You just have to be willing. Willing to rise. Willing to stay. Willing to tell the truth even when your voice shakes. And willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, your story could become someone else's survival guide. My name is Luna. I was built from ashes. But now, I build lighthouses. And if you're out there, in the dark, wondering if you'll ever make it through, look for the glow on the horizon. That's us. That's you. And I promise, you are not alone.